Good afternoon, and dzień dobry. Welcome to Visualizing Operational Informatics Data using R. My name is Connie Zaborowska, and I work with Dr. Leslie McIntosh at the Center for Biomedical Informatics at Washington University in St. Louis. This is a hands-on tutorial on rCharts library for R. By now you should have installed R, RStudio, and packages DevTools and rCharts, and for the next tutorial you will need Shiny and Shiny Dashboard packages. You can use the listed commands or follow the instructions to install the packages from source provided on the flash drives. For this tutorial, we'll use an R file called Hands-on rCharts FD. It has some stutter code for the tutorial and also loads some dummy data from a CSV file. As you can see, I am now in RStudio and I have this file open. The stutter code provided loads the necessary library, which is rCharts. It reads in the dataset, which is a dummy dataset we created. Also loads a function for converting dates into POSIX format, which is required for rCharts library charts. And then it prepares the data for visualization. Let's go ahead and select all of that code and run it. You can now take a look at the data that we will be plotting. It is called HD tickets. This dataset stores the number of help desk tickets opened on each day for the past year and a half. This would show us the historical trend of help desk services overall, in case we wanted to correlate that with important application deployments or other events. For that, we would build a time series plot using the date variable called created. It is in POSIX format, so it looks like a number, and then the number of tickets that were created on each of these days. Step 1. Let's plot a time series chart with a single line of code using rCharts library, which is part of rCharts package. You can see the full API for JavaScript rCharts at this link. And in this step, you will basically learn the simplest format that the hplot function requires. rCharts library is perhaps the most customizable of any library in the rCharts package. Going back to RStudio, let's scroll down to beneath the preparation code and add some space where we will start creating our chart. Let's call this chart HD tickets plot. We will assign this variable an object created using hplot function. This function takes several arguments. The first one is the numerical variable that we will be plotting, which is tickets. Then tilde, that's a curly horizontal line, and then you specify the variable that we are plotting over, which is the date variable created. After a comma, you have to name the data set that you're using. In our case, it's data equals HD tickets. And then after another comma, we have to specify what type of the chart you would like to see. In our case, the type equals line, in quotation marks. This line of code will create the chart object. So if you run it, you will actually not see anything. In order to display the chart object, you have to call it. So we will type HD tickets plot and then execute this line of code. Unfortunately, my RStudio is zoomed in, so you don't see it in my viewer box, but I will click on the button to view it in browser, and that's our chart. Doesn't look very attractive at this moment, and also you will notice the numerical variables for dates. So that's your POSIX format. We will also need to change our x-axis label to say something more coherent than just created. Step 2. This doesn't look very attractive, and the dates are represented as numbers, which is not very helpful. So we want to fix the values in x-axis. We want to make them look like date-time format, and also want to add a proper label to the x-axis. Notice that going forward, we'll use $sign notation to modify the chart object. So let's go back to RStudio. To modify the chart object, we will add a new line after the first where we created the chart object. We will call HD tickets plot, and after $, we will refer to one of the attributes that this object has, and it's x-axis. Notice that we will be using camel case to refer to the attributes. In parentheses, you will provide the values that you're customizing. So for instance, we want to customize the title. We will say equals, and after that, you will want to wrap the values that you customize, if there's more than one, into a list. So we will start a list, and inside of it, we will modify text of the title. We will call it created date. Technically, you could put a comma here and modify more things about the title, like its style and position. However, in our case, we will just modify the text. So outside of the list, let's add a comma and modify the type of x-axis. It will be date time. Once you do this, JavaScript library will know how to represent your dates and will not use numbers anymore. Now let's select all of this code, including the call to the chart object, and click Run again. I will open it in the browser. This is much better. Now you can see that the dates are represented as April 15 and July 15 instead of numbers. And if you hover over each of the values on the line, you will also see more details, like the exact date. The title of x-axis has also been changed to the value we provided, which is created date. This is a big improvement. However, we will also want to get rid of the grid lines because they seem to be unnecessary. You can see the trend without them. And also we will want to change on the y-axis the title. So step 3, the label for y-axis needs clarification, and we would like to get rid of the grid lines. So to resolve that, we would need to modify y-axis just like we did x-axis. You will need to specify the color for grid lines to be white, because that's unfortunately the only way you can get rid of them. So going back to RStudio, let's add another new line. We will call HD tickets plot $y-axis, and inside of it we will do a similar change as for x-axis. We will type title equals list of text, and let's call it help desk tickets. Outside of the list, we will modify the grid lines color. Grid line color. We will set it to white, which in hexadecimal code is hashtag and 6 Fs. And that's it. Let's select all of this code and run it again and take a look. You can now see that the chart looks much cleaner and your attention is not drawn to the grid lines. Instead, you can clearly see the trend. You will also notice the new label for our y-axis. Great. Step 4. As this is looking much better, we still want to add a title to the overall chart. You can add a title to the chart in 2 ways, and one of them is to include it into the hplot function itself in our first line. We will also want to add zooming to the chart so we can look at portions of data in more detail. For that, you will use the chart attribute. So let's go back to RStudio, add a new line. Actually, I would like to point out that it doesn't matter in what order you modify the attributes of the chart. What does matter is that you don't duplicate them. So let's add HD tickets plot again, $chart. Inside of it, you will modify zoom type attribute. We will set it equal to X. That means that we will be zooming across the x-axis. Technically, you could set it to X, Y, or XY, which would mean that you will zoom in across 2 dimensions. While we're in the chart attribute, we could also provide values for height and width of the chart if we wanted to change them. For instance, you could set height to 400, which is actually the default height of the chart. We also wanted to change the title, so let's go back to the hplot function in our first line, add a comma, and set title equal to help desk tickets over time. Let's go ahead and select all of this code and hit run again. I will view it in the browser. You will now notice that we have a great title over our chart. We have a clean look with no grid lines. We also modified the height, which you don't really see, but you can now zoom in on a portion of this chart. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this area. You will need to click on an area where you want to start your zooming and drag it over to the end. Great. You can now see this portion of time in more detail. You will notice that you can see these dots on the line. They're called markers. They kind of look archaic, so I would prefer to get rid of them. If you would like to return to the previous view, you can reset your zoom using this button. Step 5. This is almost great, but let's get rid of the dots on the line as I mentioned before. We will use the plot options attribute to do that, and we will use the same attribute to change the color of the line. Back in our studio, let's add a new line, call HD tickets plot $plot options. Because we're working with a line, you will want to start your attribute description with line equals. And inside a list, you will modify the parameters that you need. For instance, the color. Let's make it a deep blue color. The hexadecimal code for that is #4033. Add a comma and then modify the marker attribute. Marker equals, there are several things we can change about the marker, so we will also wrap it into a list. The only thing we actually want to change is enabled equals F, which stands for false. Basically, we're disabling the markers on the line. And that's it. Let's highlight the code and run. This looks great. The color of the chart has changed to be darker blue, and we also will not see the markers when we zoom in. Step 6. If you would like to get really fancy, you can change the tooltips of the chart. For instance, let's say the date format in the tooltip now is too precise. You do not want to see the day of the week in it. You can play around with tooltip functionality, but in our example, we will set it to only the date. For this, we will use the tooltip attribute. You can see more details about the tooltip attribute at this link. Let's go back to our studio, add a new line, call HD tickets plot $tooltip. We will modify date, time, label formats. We will set it equal to a list, and the only thing we want to set is the day parameter. I have looked it up ahead of time, and in order to just display the date, the values we need to provide in quotation marks are %B, which is the short name of the month, %E, which is the day, comma, %Y, which is the year. This is all we will change at the moment. Let's run this code one last time. View in the browser. If you hover over the values now, you will see, let's say, December 4, 2015. You will no longer see the day of the week. To sum up, in just a few lines of code, we've been able to modify the x-axis and the y-axis. We've made the chart look clean and nice. You can zoom in on the portion of the chart. You have a clear title, and you've customized the color. At this point, you're ready to create a chart on your own. We provide some data preparation code in this file and the requirements to build a vertical bar chart. Please feel free to try this later. We'll post the solutions in the tutorial code on GitHub. This is it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for your attention.